From the Toronto Star, I'm Saba Eitizaz, and this matters. When Toronto employment lawyer Ryan Watkins was in law school, he was one of 2 Black students in his class. Can you imagine the pressure? And that speaks to a larger story. Despite talking about discrimination, systemic racism, and the reigniting of the Black Lives Matter movement, Black, Indigenous, and BIPOC are still having a problem claiming their space in essentially white institutions. It's still an exclusive club, and they're not handing out memberships. And once again, the data tells the story. The Law Society of Ontario, which represents more than 55,000 lawyers, says only 3.2% of Ontario's lawyers are Black. And that's what led Ryan Watkins to dig deeper. He recently conducted a visual analysis of 12 leading law firms of Toronto and found something startling. The firms studied have more than 1,500 partners listed in Ontario. Only 16 of them are Black. That is 1%. He talks to me today about what led him to this project, why are there not enough Black lawyers climbing the ranks, and what that means for Canada's society and how we look at justice. Ryan Watkins is a partner at the Toronto law firm Whitten & Lublin and one of the city's leading employment law experts. Hi, Ryan. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So first of all, I want to talk to you a little bit about numbers. I understand that you initiated a visual analysis of the websites of some of Toronto's top law firms. What did you find out and what led you down that path?
Sure. So in terms of the stats, they're quite startling. So of the 12 largest law firms in the country, only approximately 1% of them have Black partners. So at the highest level of the law firms in terms of their hierarchy, there's only 1% of them are Black. And there are approximately 55,000 lawyers in the country, and only 3.2% of them are Black. So we can see from the analysis that both in terms of just becoming a lawyer, there's not a lot of Black lawyers, and then achieving the highest level of success, there's even less of that. And so what led me to this is I am a partner at my law firm. And when I got there, I questioned, why aren't there more of like me out there? And so that led me to just do a quick study by myself to see, what do the numbers look at? So I practice in Toronto on Bay Street. And so what do the numbers look like for Bay Street lawyers? And so I started by looking at simply going to these law firms' websites. They don't make this information readily available. So I had to do it manually, go on the website, and I manually counted, because these firms have pictures of their lawyers. So I manually counted how many Black partners that they have.
That's very interesting, and something I will delve more into with you later about this lack of racial data on this problem. But what exactly is the problem here? Why are Toronto's biggest law firms failing to hire and advance Black lawyers from these numbers? That's the tale that it seems to be telling.
Yeah, so I think there's a few reasons why that is. Number one, it starts at the law school level, or even getting into law school. So the first thing is that law school is expensive, and it continues to increase in terms of tuition cost year over year. And it's unfortunate for a lot of people, students in the minority community, who come from a lower socioeconomic background, who can't simply afford to go to law school, even if they have the grades and they would be great candidates to be lawyers. The cost is a barrier to entry. So that's the first problem I think we encounter. Another problem is that to get into law school, you have to write a law school admissions test, and this test favors those who have money, who can hire private tutors to teach them how to ace the test, so to speak. And so, again, minorities are at a disadvantage who don't have the money to hire private tutors or take a course in assisting them in acing the test. I think then once we find The very few of Black lawyers, or at that time students, who get into law school, they face tremendous challenges. For me personally, I was only one of two Black students in my section. So in law school, in your first year, you're broken up into sections. So you could have a class of, let's say, 200, but you're further broken down into sections, maybe of 50 students per section, and you stay with those students for your first year. You take all of your classes with them. So in my section, I was only one of two. And so you find it difficult to adapt to this changing environment, this new environment that you're in. And you also have that weight, rightly or wrongly, of color that you have to succeed because there's only a couple of you. So you're always looking to ensure that you are upholding the Black community and making sure you're doing your best to reflect that you belong here. And so I think a lot of Black students find it difficult to navigate. Then we look at all of those challenges, and then after you graduate from law school, then you encounter more challenges looking for a job at a firm. And that starts in law school, where after your first year, they have something called on-campus interviews, where all of the big firms go to the schools and select who they want to interview for summer positions and then articling positions after that. And so there's also challenges for the Black community because there's an emphasis on grades. There's an emphasis on quote unquote fitting into the firm's culture, whatever that means. And to be honest, what that really means is, in my opinion, a country club style firm where, people like to golf and like to do cultural things that, quite frankly, sometimes a lot of Black students may not want to do or don't practice. You can just look at, in terms of golf, the PGA Tour. We all know Tiger Woods, but it's sometimes hard to name any other Black golfers on the PGA Tour. And so big firms are used to meeting clients that way on the golf course and closing deals. And so for some Black students who don't do that, from the perspective of those firms, they don't fit into the firm culture. So you find problems there in terms of hiring. So that's what I looked at as some of the barriers. Certainly there's more, but that kind of gives you an idea of what Black students are up against.
And it's interesting that you mentioned the firm's culture and a sort of allusion to like a country club style way of networking and hiring. And from the numbers that we've been talking about, it seems that a relatively small community is dominated by a handful of powerful players. What role do you think has systemic racism played into this? How is the lack of Black representation a reflection of the systemic barriers that young people from racialized communities have to face?
Yeah, it is truly a systemic barrier. And I think the numbers bear that out. When you look at, in terms of the repercussions of this, you have to look at the fact that the Black community is simply not being represented in the justice system. And when we look at it, oftentimes we focus on the criminal justice system and the lack of representation there, which is truly the case. But I am in the corporate space. And you have to also look at the fact that Black businesses don't have that legal representation. A Black lawyer who can understand the culture and some of the challenges faced by those corporate companies and certainly small businesses. That lack of representation permeates all the way down through society. So, certainly those systematic barriers are difficult to overcome.
And in what ways are Black people who are working in the legal industry being treated differently than their white counterparts, speaking to your experience and what you've observed?
Yeah. So, again, the stats bear out that Black lawyers are not being promoted in the same manner as their white counterparts. For me, particularly, when I was first starting out, I articled at a boutique firm, and one of the partners there, I had never worked on a file with him, or very rarely, and he asked me to come along to a hearing with him, and I hadn't prepped for the hearing. He just wanted me to simply attend. And when I got there, the defendant on the other side was Black. And so the only reason why the partner at the firm invited me along was because I was Black as well, and I could relate and look to our firm, at least to the hearing officer, hey, we're not discriminating against this person. See, we've hired a Black person. And so those subtle things, I've heard several stories from Black lawyers who had similar type of experiences, little slights here and there, or comments, this is how we do things here. It looks like you can't live up to the expectations here. Those type of slights and comments have certainly followed a lot of my Black colleagues along the way.
We'll be right back. You've already spoken a little bit about this, but I want to talk a little bit more about what we may call sort of the invisible labor of being a person of color and trying to fit into a traditionally white institution or space. How challenging has it been as a Black man to maintain the image of a lawyer? And do you feel that racialized people have to work hardest to maintain that? And what, in terms of invisible labor, are the elements that go into that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you always, again, feel the weight of your Blackness on your shoulder and that you have to adapt. Culturally, one of the things that I notice is that we almost have to leave our culture at the door to fit into the greater, let's call it white society and what they view as being a lawyer, right? And so for me, being a lawyer, I can't be a lawyer without that cultural aspect and the background of where I came from. I can't suppress that. But a lot of Black lawyers have to in order to, fit into society. And there's only a small few that make it to the top. But to make it to the top, that's kind of the strategy that they have to employ, that we're not going to rock the boat at all. We're going to fit into the culture at large. And that's the only way that we're going to be successful.
Do you think that conversation and that situation has changed somewhat in the context of, we've seen the reignition of the Black Lives Matter movement that aims to fight racism across the globe? Do you think this is having an impact or will have an impact on the process of recruitment and selection in the legal industry in Canada in terms of inclusion and diversity?
Yeah, so time will tell. I mean, certainly these corporate entities and law firms, the biggest law firms in the country, talk about it. We've seen initiatives pop up related to Black Lives Matter and how we can do better in terms of diversity. And all of these firms talk the language of that. If you go on their website, you're going to see that they are all about diversity, and they'll probably even have policies on their website that talk about diversity. But the numbers bear out that they're just simply not doing a good enough job at recruiting, retaining, and promoting Black lawyers. You can't look away from the statistics on this.
What do you think really needs to change at both the individual and industry levels?
Yeah, so I mean, it's as simple on a macro level of hiring more Black lawyers, going out and looking for that talent, because that talent is there. And so I always say and challenge these big firms, they're great at sponsoring Black lawyers events. They're great at putting their name on the door, so to speak. But, when you go to the events, the lack of representation that you see at these events are startling. And so, we need corporate Canada and law firms in general to actually go to these events, speak to lawyers of color, and hear from them what are some of the challenges that they're facing and what are the solutions to do better. So on one hand, the solution is quite simple. But on the other hand, more than that needs to be done. So large firms have to, I think it starts obviously at the top. So at the partnership level, there has to be an increase in promotion of Black lawyers. It goes without saying that once there's representation at the top and more people in the room to kind of give their divergent perspective, things are going to move down from there to the bottom. So we need to see more promotion of Black lawyers. And so when I say that, there's a misconception that what Black lawyers want is some type of quota system, that you need X amount of Black lawyers. And that's truly not what we're asking for. Here, what we're asking for is just to have a seat at the table, just to get in the room, just to get that interview. That's what we're looking for. And we're certainly not looking to be anybody's quota to be met, because I'm sure these firms will find once you start interviewing more Black lawyers, you're going to see that they are certainly right for the job in terms of skill and academics. We just need an opportunity to showcase that.
And one of the things that came up repeatedly when I was speaking to you and I was researching the story was how a lot of these large law firms either don't have or haven't made public any comprehensive race-based data on representation. Have you found that because you started that initiative, that web analysis yourself? Why and what is the importance here of having race-based data, and why is it not existing right now?
Yeah, so without the data, we never will really know the extent of the problem. And that's perhaps one of the reasons why the data is not readily available. And so when I looked at it, I saw immediately how apparent is that things need to change in the legal community. So that's the why we need these numbers to be put out there so people can really see the extent of the problem.
And what advice would you give to Black law students on how to navigate these challenges and these hurdles in their careers, as you mentioned?
Yeah, so on the student side, it's certainly difficult, as I mentioned, to navigate law school. And you find in talking to a lot of Black students that it is difficult to kind of get your feet under you. I think in terms of students, I would say seek out opportunities to join with other Black students and make your voice be heard on this issue. Certainly don't stay silent. And also reach out to these big law firms and let them know that things need to change, and that if after on-campus interviews, you talk to your friends and see that nobody got an interview, well, then demand of those big law firms change and demand that more interviews should be given to Black students. So until we can all band together, we're not going to see real change until we demand that these firms put out the stats of how many Black lawyers are being interviewed, how many are being hired, how many are being promoted. We're not going to see the real change either. So we have to demand that of them.
And we spoke a little bit about the consequences of this lack of representation in the justice system on society. I want to talk a little bit more about it. Why will Canada's legal system benefit from greater and better representation in the context of current racial and social issues?
Yeah, so the Black community, the minority community has been underrepresented in the legal field for years. And that has a drastic impact on the legal system. And so we've talked about on the corporate side what that looks like and how detrimental that is when Black business owners cannot go and seek representation at the highest level at some of these big firms of another Black lawyer, or there's very few that they can reach out to. We didn't touch on the criminal justice system, but there as well, where the lack of representation and the lack of cultural awareness for those people minorities who do get in trouble with the law, not having the representation where somebody who may have been in that same situation or came from those environments. For me personally, I grew up in Scarborough in the Malvern neighborhood, well known for drugs and gangs. And I was able to make it out and be a success story. Those type of stories we need more when we're representing clients, to say, hey, you may have got in trouble on the criminal side, or hey, your business may be struggling now, but here's a success story of another person who looks like you. You can do it as well. You can get out of this situation as well. And I think that's so important to have not only the legal representation, but almost a mentorship as well that goes along with having minority clients matched with a minority lawyer.
Thank you so much for your time and insight, Ryan.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
I was speaking to Ryan Watkins. He's one of the city's leading employment law experts. That's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. This Matters is hosted and produced by me, Saba Eitizaz, Adrian Chung, and Raju Mutter. Produced and mixed by Sean Pattenden, and our director of programming is JP Fozo. Our show theme music is by So-Called, and our episode music is by Mike DeAngelis. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.